Hello, this is Kathy Baldock and Yvette Schneider, and we welcome you to episode 2 of the podcast, Sisters of Thunder. And today it's going to be a really interesting one, and I decided that it might be best early in the series to focus on Yvette's background with her work inside of both the religious right and within the ex-gay ministry Exodus. So you talked to us a little bit about that last week in podcast number 1, and I suggest that people go back and listen to that as well. We both introduce ourselves. But could you give us kind of a rundown, Yvette, on the jobs you had working with pro-family and religious right lobby groups and ex-gay groups?
Well, I started working for Family Research Council in 1998 as a policy analyst, and I did a lot of spokesperson type of things there. I spoke on college campuses. I spoke before a lot of state legislatures. I spoke at conferences. Then I left to have my first daughter, and after that I became a consultant for Concerned Women for America. After that, I wasn't in Washington, D.C. anymore, so I worked also as a consultant for Athletes in Action and Fellowship of Christian Athletes. Then in 2008, I became the first director of women's ministry for Exodus International, where I stayed until 2011.
That's, that's a pretty impressive pedigree for working on the other side. And if people want to understand how Yvette has made that switch to no longer being in those positions, we were having a conversation this week because we're going to both be writing for the new civil rights movement. And the editor, it's a blog in a newspaper. It's just really good quality writing. And David Badash, who runs it, when I first said that I wanted Yvette to join me in writing too, said, "Are you sure she's not still on the inside of the religious right and FRC? Because you were pretty well entrenched in there." And can you give us just a quick view? You did last week, but as this stands alone, how did you exit that? Can you do the quick story of how you exited the religious right to start thinking about there may be other opinions out there?
Well, what's interesting is I have friends who left because they were part of Exodus, for example, or other ex-gay ministries where they realized that they were still gay even after all these years. And that's the reason they left. That's not the reason I left. Mm-hmm. It had nothing to do with that at all. It was that I was at a place when my daughter was diagnosed with leukemia, and I went through this period of intense anxiety. I had panic attacks. I could barely function. So all I could do was care for my daughter and isolate myself. I could barely go to the grocery store, really.
Wow.
I mean, I would be in line at the grocery store and feel like I'm going to panic. But if I leave the grocery store, I know I will develop a phobia of grocery shopping, so I have to stay here. Every time was like that. So If you can imagine how intense that anxiety was, or even just driving to the grocery store. So I spent a lot of time alone. I spent a lot of time meditating, drawing pictures of what I had meditated on, and it allowed me to really experience myself for the first time. I had been so influenced by outside forces and being a people pleaser, trying to please this person, trying to find where I would fit in, trying to find where I belong, trying to find a replacement family. I wasn't really close with my family. Mm-hmm. And now I finally found a time where, okay, who am I? What do I believe? Because my therapist told me, who I went to for help with the anxiety, look, anxiety isn't always caused just by your outside circumstances. Of course, you're going to have anxiety if your daughter has cancer, but I have a feeling you had anxiety long before your daughter had cancer, and that's usually because you're not living authentically. She said this the second time I walked into her office. So Wow. She knew nothing about me at this point except that my daughter had cancer. That's all she knew about me.
And all of this is covered. Yvette's written a book, Never Not Broken, which you can get on Amazon. And it's really a fascinating journey of how to become whole or more whole, right? We're always still constantly on journeys, but it's a fascinating story that I read within a few short weeks of meeting Yvette, because I didn't understand how she could be where she was, how she could have gone through that much panic and appeared to be this together, sensible, reasonable, brilliant woman in front of me. How did all that happen? So if you want to know how that happened, you can either go for a hike with her several days a week for the next year, or you can read her book.
But when you've gone through something like that, it's not so easy to put people in a box anymore.
Oh,
it's
isn't that interesting?
It's not so easy to be dismissive of others, because I knew the pain and suffering that I had gone through in this experience with my daughter. I knew how complex of a person I was, how my thoughts didn't always match my actions, that there were things that that sort of would grind your gears. People aren't as smooth and polished and together as we would like to think that people are.
Right.
A lot of people are walking contradictions.
And you were.
And I was a walking contradiction. Right. I didn't even realize for years and years that I was a walking contradiction. But once I did, then I could say, okay, maybe I should look at other people.
Wow.
And say, there has to be more to them than this. So really, it really had nothing to do with the gay issue at all. It just had to do with sort of a shared humanity.
So at the end, I want to come back to what other things it was that got you out of that. But one of the things we want to, or how we want to approach this topic, or all the topics we talk about on Sisters of Thunder, and as I said it in the beginning, we want to approach things with a more grace-filled, educated, intelligent attitude. And I know I've fallen into this trap before, where I've said about. And even the word opponent doesn't make me feel comfortable. So I can't say, I could be a good Christian and say my enemy, and that would be sort of a biblical term. Or I could use the word opponent for people that believe other than I do, but I don't want to see people that way either. So I don't want to see them as my opponents. Sometimes I want to just see people as not well-informed, or just operating with less information than I am, or not having the breadth of relationships and information I do. But the last thing we should do is call people, I guess it would be fair to say on the other side of this equation, crazy or stupid, because you have some strong opinions about that. Are they crazy and stupid?
Absolutely not. And of course, I'm going to say that because I was part of that.
Right.
So I'm not going to say, hey, I was crazy and stupid and now I'm not. But really, most of these people are well educated and they firmly believe what they believe. And it's not crazy that you would, if you're raised Christian, I was raised Catholic. We were nominally Catholic. I mean, I was confirmed and baptized and all of that, but this wasn't something that we talked about at home, as opposed to some of my friends who were raised in Christian homes. When I became a Christian, it was, look, the Bible is the true inspired word of God. It is given to us through man, but the words are God's words. And this is what they mean. And this is what they've always meant when we're talking about something like homosexuality. Mm-hmm. It wasn't really a debate. There wasn't anything in the Bible that said, oh, this is how a loving gay couple acts. The only way you could read it, if you were just breezing through, would be, yeah, okay, homosexuality is a sin, right? I don't see this ever painted in a positive light. But whoever stopped to really dig deeper? We didn't stop to really dig deeper. So if you came up in a home where the Bible's taught as the true inerrant word of God, and you go to college, especially you go to a Christian college, by the time you're ready to start your career and you're going into public policy or something like that, this is an entrenched belief. This isn't something that has ever been questioned. Most of the time, nothing that's ever really been studied. You just take it for granted. This is what the Bible says about homosexuality. So everything after that is looked through that lens. You're going to just assume homosexuality is a sin. Okay, let's go from there and say, okay, now people are trying to redefine marriage. Who's trying to redefine marriage? Gay people are trying to redefine marriage. Why? Because, in Romans, they've been given over to their lusts.
Right. Broken, rebellious people.
Right. It completely makes sense if you're in that world. It completely makes sense. What I see now is that we weren't ever questioning that. That was never something, unless I guess that you were gay yourself. Why would you have a reason to go back?
So when we look at the public faces of this conversation, which the most public faces on the public policy and the religious right side, there are some pretty noisy people within the religious movement, and we could pick them out within the sort of fringe religious movement, or even within the Southern Baptist Conference. We can pick some of those people out too, but the most visible ones are Tony Perkins and Peter Spriggs from FRC, Family Research Council, Penny Nance from Concerned Women, or Ann Paulk from Restored Hope Network, and I hope we get to talking about that group today, or Janet Parshall, or Robert Gagnon, the most famous non-affirming anti-gay theologian in the United States. And so they really believe, would you think, that they are speaking for God? They really believe this. You were a true believer.
Absolutely, they believe that they're speaking for God.
So
100%.
How do we, as people that want to impact this conversation, how do we, you and I, but how do we, other people that want to have constructive, forward-moving, educated conversations, how do we, if at all, engage people at that level? Do we ignore people at that level? Do we educate to the objections that they're constantly raising? Do we not look at them and just keep moving forward? What do we do about these voices that are out there that are not really the majority? We know they're not the majority because the majority of people in the United States are for marriage equality. Perhaps not the majority of evangelicals, maybe Baptist and more conservative faiths, but Christians, the mainstream, the non-mainstream, these people inside of FRC really don't speak for them. So how do we engage those voices or objections? How do we do that productively?
I think there are many ways to do it. One is engaging the middle. The people who are not so firmly entrenched, and do that through education. There are so many things, Kathy, that you and I have talked about on our hikes that I didn't know.
Right.
So many things that I didn't know. And it was, and I even wrote in the beginning of your book, when I endorsed your book, if I had known these things, I would not have participated in the religious right. I would not have fought against some of these rights. I just wouldn't have, because there were things that I absolutely didn't know.
And what were those things that you didn't know that could have been like light bulbs in your head?
Okay, well, one of them, and we've talked about this so many times, and I know we're going to probably talk about more of these points later today, but the one, the 1972 gay rights platform, that's
stunning, right?
Huge.
Stunning.
It's huge in the pro-family, anti-LGBT movement to go back and reference that. And there are some pretty damning points in it, which I will read some of those later. But one of them was the repeal of all laws governing age of consent.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So we're on a hike one day, and you told me, Well, the ages of consent were different for heterosexuals than they were for homosexuals. They were 18 years old for heterosexuals and
For homosexuals.
for homosexuals,
Right.
and 16 for heterosexuals.
Right.
So the point behind that poorly worded point was equality.
Right. That's all it was.
And in the pro-family movement, we looked at it like, that's pedophilia. You want to repeal all age of consent laws.
And you never questioned.
Never question, because it's in their own words. It's right there.
Right.
It's in their own words. And that was the other thing. We would take quotes from gay activists, and I did this myself. I didn't really look at them so much in context. I certainly didn't call any of these gay activists and say, is this actually what you meant? Is this what you meant to say? I remember, gosh, I don't remember what year it was, but Kate Kendall, of the National Center for Lesbian Rights, she was talking about her daughter saying, who was real young at the time, talking like 2 years old, and I could be wrong on some of these points, but the point is, her daughter said, Kate Kendall said, her daughter said, "My daddy is far, far away." Well, okay, that's gold for us in the pro-family movement. Yes, a child needs a mother and father. Look, this child is calling out for her daddy, or saying, "My daddy's far, far away." Did I call up Kate Kendall and say, well, what was the rest of the conversation with your daughter? What exactly was she trying to express?
Right.
What was happening in your family at the time? What conversation had you had prior to that? What's the whole context of this? No, it's see, even
Wow.
the gay activists can see that a child needs a mother and a father.
And talking about taking things out of context. So I was given, there's a book that's constantly quoted, by the religious.
Constantly, because you and I are the only ones I know who own this book.
Isn't that funny? So Yvette and I have bonded over many things. Homeschooling mothers, we both own a book that I've got right in front of me right now, and it's called After the Ball, and it was written by two gay activists, Kurt and Mattson, and the year on it is I'll find the year in a second. But anyway, it's supposed to be the gay agenda that's been written. So this is it's from
And I
1990.
challenge you, who knows who Kirk and Madsen are?
Outside of the religious right. So this book it's subtitled How America Will Conquer Its Fear and Hatred of the Gays in the 90s. Well, I have never seen a more obscure book quoted so much. If you go onto Amazon, when I first got this book, someone gave it to me. They found it in a garage sale and said, you've got to have this, Kathy. And I was like, it was like Christmas to me, because I'd never seen it. In all of the homes I had been in, here is supposedly the gay agenda laid out for the 1990s. No one I know has ever read it. Only the religious right has ever read it. And they take these points that would probably be good community activism points, and they take the quotes completely out of context, and they just keep quoting them over and over and over again. And I hear, I go into things and they say, well, this is a technique from the gay agenda. And they're talking about this book. It's constant that things are taken out of context and quoted and overquoted.
We had a copy of that book at Family Research Council.
We're the only two.
We had a copy of that book at Family Research Council that we had Post-its, as bookmarks. Like, the whole thing was indexed according to, okay, here's a quote for this, here's a quote for this, here's a quote for this. But again, you have to go back and say you're operating from the idea that the world is flat.
Yeah.
And so you're always going to find ways to prove that the world is flat. We're always operating from the place of homosexuality is a sin. It has to be proven that it's a sin. So no amount of information is going to change someone's mind who's in the pro-family movement, deeply entrenched, I mean, that's their job. That's their job.
So what is, besides what's contained in this book, what is the gay agenda according to them? Where is this gay agenda?
Well, like we talked about, the 1972 gay rights platform, right? And these are some of the things that was on it. And these were the things that we would look at. Okay, but before I get to that, okay, so the gay agenda would be redefining marriage, granting adoption rights to gay couples. So by that, you are redefining the family. That's lowering the age of consent, forcing employers who think that homosexuality is wrong to hire people who are gay, forcing, this was a biggie, that this is about to happen, that churches are going to be forced to hire people who are gay. Those were a lot of, but it was basically the whole, you are going to completely redefine the family. And we can't allow that to happen. And this was a quote, again, another quote from Michelangelo Signorile.
His own quote, right?
This is his own quote.
Yep.
This was in Out magazine. This is another quote that we love to use. So you can't say, oh, well, we don't think that there's, where is this gay agenda? I see memes on Facebook all the time. Oh, the gay agenda, I'm ironing my shirt today. But actually there are quotes. That's my gay agenda for the day. And then I'm going out to eat at Chick-fil-A. So this is Michelangelo Signorile's quote. Okay, that was in Out magazine. To fight for same-sex marriage and its benefits, and then, once granted, redefine the institution of marriage completely. To demand the right to marry not as a way of adhering to society's moral codes, but rather to debunk a myth and radically alter an archaic institution. The most subversive action lesbians and gay men can undertake, and one that would perhaps benefit all of society, is to transform the notion of family entirely. That's something that we would look at and say, okay, this is a gay activist. This is part of the gay agenda.
And the interesting thing is I can take that same quote and say, from my study of social history, my understanding of the social history of marriage, understand exactly where he's coming from, because Signorile is a very intelligent man. He's very, very intelligent, and he's well-read and well-researched. And I could understand why he would say that, but I could also understand how the conservative, the social and religious right would take that kind of quote, spit it out again, drive fear into their followers. And people would think, all they would hear from that is they want to redefine marriage. And
we
now
see that
added
all
to
the
that,
time when someone says something sarcastically and then it's reprinted as if it's being said straight, all the time, and never once going back and saying, what did you actually mean by this? Or having an intelligent discussion and saying, look, the way marriage is now, the way we have in our society now, women are still very oppressed, especially in the Christian circles.
Yes, they are.
Where you have women who are encouraged to stay home and raise their children. Not that there's anything wrong with that, because that's what I did, and I'm happy that I did. But there's the element of, okay, you're trapped because you don't have an income of your own. And there was, in the Christian circles I was in, I won't speak for the entire church as a whole, it was very patriarchal, where the father's on top, the husband's on top, the wife has to completely submit to the husband. And she's if something goes wrong, if he's cheating on her, if he's out getting drunk, whatever it is that he's doing, she is now stuck in this marriage. She has no way out because divorce is wrong in the church. These are the sorts of things that I heard all the time.
And we know from studying history and doing research that it's not been gay couples that have redefined marriage. The women's rights movement, the availability of contraception, just the whole feminist movement in the 60s redefined marriage more radically than it had been thousands of years before, when women were in a different place than men. And now women wanted equality. And so that redefined marriage. But also in the mid 1800s, marriage was redefined from an economic and property status, to to one of love. And people even were so upset and afraid when marriage became an institution about two people loving one another and making a conscious decision rather than an economic decision to get married. So we've had these conversations before about the redefinition of marriage, but now what is also added onto that, the gay agenda, from what I hear from leaders, still a lot of political leaders, that gays are out to destroy the American family. They're out to destroy the Christian church. When I think of the majority of gay people I know, LGBT people I know, are Christians. And I was saying this to some friends that were visiting me last night. And people may not understand this if they don't live my life. But I've been on the conservative evangelical tribe too, and I'm where I am now. And I interact with lots of people. But the absolute finest people I know are LGBT people. And the finest examples of Jesus Christ that I know are LGBT Christians. Now, to somebody that may be on the other side of this conversation, they'll think she's duped. She can't be telling the truth. But when Christians love to say, when we're persecuted, we show our best side of Jesus, right? It's only when you're persecuted, it's only when the coal is compressed that it becomes a piece of a beautiful gem or a diamond. Well, why wouldn't it work that way with the LGBT community? This is an oppressed group of people that have had to fight their way back to, does God really love me? And they have to struggle way more than heterosexual me does. I mean, I just become a Christian, just assume that God's crazy about me. As my mother says, Kathy, you're like a little puppy. You think everybody just adores you. Well, I'm just, right? I'm just so convinced that I didn't have to do anything. I chose God and he loved me for it, But LGBT people aren't the same way. So it's just so interesting that people can take words out of context and they're not operating. I'm assuming that people inside the religious right or FRC and places like that they don't have close relationships with gay people. They certainly don't have them over to dinner with their children. They have no understanding of what LGBT families look like. I mean, did you? But you did from the past.
I did from the past, but my friends weren't Christians. And I have my own history that's linked to that, which is my friends were victims of the AIDS crisis.
Yeah.
Back in the late 80s and early 90s, when I had so many friends die of AIDS. So, yeah, I didn't have any gay Christian friends. Back then, I didn't have any Christian friends,
right,
gay or straight.
Right.
But, because I would go to the pride parades in West Hollywood, and there would be, these are the types of Christians I had contact with, the ones who were holding signs telling us gay people are going to hell. Yeah.
Boy, I mean, it's got to have been such an interesting journey for you, but to become one of those true believers on the inside it's just so fascinating because, as I said, as we started this, can they possibly really believe the stuff that's coming out of their mouth? And they do.
Well, like I said, it's because you go back, they've always been taught that homosexuality is wrong. That's the interpretation of the Bible that they've always known. And so everything has to fit into that theology. And then it becomes an ideology. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter. Whatever evidence you get has to fit into that paradigm.
So those really extreme people, so I asked the question before, I don't think we really went there. The really extreme fringe even to the religious right, the conservative right, the people like Peter LaBarbera and Matt Barber, they're pretty extreme. Scott Lively, pretty extreme. Some religious leaders that I won't give them the any kind of due of even saying their name, but they're pretty extreme, and they're vocal, and they say the messages they say are they're not balanced, they're not respectful, they're not seeing the other as any kind of person of dignity or a human. How do they fit into all of this? Like, would they be respected in those top echelons of public policy?
Well, when I was at Family Research Council, Pete LaBarbera worked there. Half of his time was spent at Family Research Council, and the other half of his time was working Americans for Truth. So I wouldn't say that they were someone like Pete was at the top of the hierarchy at all. Mm-hmm. But some of his information, because he's very good at gathering information, some of his information was seen as useful, because who else is going to go to the Folsom Street Fair and videotape, or go into a bathhouse and videotape?
That's pretty obsessive.
That's the type of thing that no one else is going to do.
Right.
But that information can be useful and valuable, because it's like scratching into the dark corners and seeing what you can find that is ugly, and then saying, okay, this is what all gay people do. All gay people are like
and you could
this.
do that with a
all
heterosexual community.
Sit in, it was very popular to talk about the bathos. This is sort of behind the scenes, where sort of these pathetic gay people who are sitting in bathrooms with a glory hole waiting for someone to come by. This is the picture of the homosexual. Forget the 35 years together. Even if they're together for 35 years, that one of them's sitting in the public bathroom waiting for someone to come to the glory hole.
And you believe these things.
This is sort of the idea that's out there. Yes, this, we're going to scratch into the dark corners and then conflate it with all homosexuals.
Well, I was at and we're going to end with this, and then we'll continue next week, because we've still got a lot of questions for you. I mean, I since the beginning of meeting you, have found your background and how you integrate it with who you are and how you see things now, and your activism as absolutely fascinating. So I'm pretty sure the listeners will. But it's really it's just fascinating what people believe about other people, or how they present it. So about a year and a half ago, I went to a local church, and they had an ex-gay leader come. And this ex-gay leader, I had listened to him speak to 200 12 to 18-year-olds. And then I came back on the Saturday night and listened to him speak again. And then I listened to him speak again on Sunday. And then during his question and answer time on Sunday afternoon, I had enough time. I'm pretty good at research. So when he said something,
yeah,
I'm really good at research. So he had said that he had been persecuted by the gay right, the gay left, gay activists for 5 years for standing up for the Bible. And I found out that he had actually broken the law as a therapist. And that's why he was being taken to court, because he broke the law. But he had an interesting, while he was giving his speech for the third time that I had heard, and I had also heard it online, he didn't stray much from his canned speech. So I sat out in the lobby and I read his book. I also can read fast. So
775-page book in
a day. Yeah, it's pretty good. So, and I can even comprehend it, which is even better. So I sat out in the lobby and read his 200-page, 2.5-spaced book. Really a bad book. But what I'm so interested in is always looking at the research in the back and the footnotes. And this man sat on the altar of a church and quoted information of the sexual habits of gay men that were going to the sex clubs and the bars from 1980, that were also subscribers to a magazine that would have been like Hustler for the straight community.
And what year was this?
And he was quoting it in 2013 or 13. He was quoting it as if those were accurate statistics, because he said, here are quotes from gay people's testimonies themselves. And they were 30 years old. And this is when the gay community was just coming out of all of that shaming And they were just, having these attitudes before AIDS even hit of, nobody's going to tell me what I can do with my body. You've told me all my life I can't do these things. I have to hide. And so there were a few pretty promiscuous, wild years there. So he was quoting 35-year-old stats as if they were happening today. And it just curled just every nerve in me because he was quoting them as if that is who the gay community is. And how dishonest. But your former employers do the same thing in the stuff that they write. They just did a paper on transgender people. They were quoting stats from 1960 and 1970 as well. So yes, they may be quoting stats. They may even be quoting people, but they're not at all putting them in context. So we're going to talk more about your stuff, your old stuff. But just what you bring to the table now in understanding, I think, is fascinating. So we're going to end it here for this week. And again, this is Sisters of Thunder. And the book that we alluded to that Yvette wrote to come out of just the very difficult panic situations that she was in and to get herself back together again was Never Not Broken. So thanks, Yvette, and I know I can get you to come back next week. I don't know what I'll offer you. I don't know. So this is Yvette and Kathy for Sisters of Thunder. Thanks for listening to us. Bye.
Bye.